Now, let's head towards another panel, which is how to communicate security in layman words to boards and non-technical stakeholder. So now we have with us our moderator for this panel boardroom discussion, Mr. Smith Gonsalves. Welcome, you, sir. He is a director and principal consultant at CyberSmith. We welcome you, sir. So now our panelists for discussions are Mr. Nitin Bhatnagar. He is Associate Director at PCI Security Standard Council. Next, we have with us Mr. Dilip Panjwani. He is Principal Director and Chief Information Security Officer and also IT Controller at L&T. Next, we have with us Dr. Khusru. He is CEO and founder of Tasha Tech Info Solution Private Limited and President of ISACA Ahmedabad. Finally, we have with us Mr. Majesh Khanna, AMS. Mr. Majesh Khanna, AMS. No. Yes. Okay. So, on the behalf of B-Sides Ahmedabad team, I welcome you, each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Smith Gonsalves, and I would be moderating one of the finest panel that we are going to basically present to you all, organized by B-Sides Ahmedabad, on a very, very interesting topic. And this topic is going to impact each and every person sitting over here in terms of thinking what is it going to be his career as part of the next 5 years or 10 years, and how he is going to evolve and communicate or is going to influence him to reach to the senior levels. And being said that, we have got an amazing panelist who would be talking on the topic communicating security to non-stakeholders and speaking it in layman words, basically simplifying it. So we have got amazing panelist, a different sort of combination. We have got Mr. Dilip Panjwani, the CISO of L&T Infotech. He comes from the CISO mindset of communicating with board. And then we have got Mr. Nitin Bhatnagar, who is the director for PCI, payment card industry standard, who basically comes from the side of what are the governing standards that the enterprise and organization needs to focus on. And then we have got Mr. Khusru, who is the president for ISACA Ahmedabad chapter, who comes from the security advisory side, who advises enterprises on what are the best security measures and enforcement that needs to take up. Now friends, when I start talking about all this, the reason of putting all this is very clear. This theme to you all is, I'm sure you people want to grow in your career. You want to reach to the high level insights that how you can be a CISO or a AVP, VP after 10 years, 15 years, 12 years. Why few people are able to make it out? Now this is because of communication and simplifying concepts to the non-technical stakeholder. And it's important for you all to understand what way these non-technical stakeholders are being presented and communicated by this 3 level of combination that we have got in the panel. So let's first start with Mr. Dilip. And I want to basically, Dilip, I have a very interesting question for you. And this question is, when you must be in situations where you have to communicate with the board for demanding a technology or a service or getting a sort of product or technology which will help you to solve that particular mitigation. But in order to do that, you need to have that accuracy, brevity, and clarity to the board, to the CEO. Then CEO expects you to give him why he needs to invest. So tell me that secret Jadoo ka mantra, which is basically going to simplify and convince the board in terms of why exactly he needs to invest in security.
Thanks, Smith. So I think there's no Jaduka mantra in this specifically. It is a definite trial and error situation that happens, and it is more understanding the sentiment of the board. End of the day, the company is responsible to meet its stakeholders, provide value. What does value mean? Provide revenue, provide the visibility in the market, provide the brand reputation as required. Now, security does not give you that directly as an outcome. It helps reach that outcome in certain aspects by preventing cyber attacks happening on the company. So that's an aspect that you have to use towards helping the board understand in non-technical terms. You can't talk about EDR and virus attacks and SQL injections out there. What does that SQL injection really mean? What does that ransomware attack really mean when it means in terms of dollars? When it means in terms of business revenue? When it means in terms of the go-to-market capability of the or the customer perceptions? That is what you need to translate the technical jargons in front of the board. Make them understand that, okay, I am today using an antivirus, which is the standard antivirus which has been used for the last 20 years so far, but this is not enough. It is as good as your guard sitting outside the main gate. He can only see possibly, okay, do you have a lanyard on your neck showing up besides or no, and hence allow you in the conference. But beyond that, you need somebody else with also possibly a metal detector scanner later on. You need to have baggages checked through a X-ray system and all those aspects. Hence, the new capabilities have to be brought in. A person with a lanyard could be anybody. I could just throw mine in the dustbin outside once I leave the conference. Somebody else walks in with it. So you don't identify it by lanyard alone. Hence, you need to allow every person to be scanned, to be checked, validated again, and those things require more investments. Similar way, why antivirus versus why EDR, that aspect has to be brought up in simple terms as to what is it that the EDR is going to help with, what is it really that the board can relate to. For example, board will relate to the headlines which have happened in the market with regards to which organization got hacked. What was the impact of the organization from a regulator perspective, customer perspective, revenue perspective, and how possible is it to happen in our organization when we are trying to ask for the budget. It cannot be just a hypothetical situation where you say a healthcare industry got hacked and the same control is required for a banking industry. That does not work. It has to be in the same line of business to understand that context. And that's when the board can relate to what you are asking for.
Interesting. So ultimately, it downs towards business requirements, the business impact, and particularly the incidents that can be taken up as an examples.
Definitely. One thing we have to always keep in mind is security is there to protect the business. Business is not there to run security.
True. So with that, I move to Mr. Nitin. And Mr. Nitin, while Dilip was mentioning about ransomwares and different attacks or vulnerabilities, that brings me to a very important point, and that is non-compliance. So we have seen, or what we see in the overall side of the auditor side is, there are different sort of ruckus that happens with the auditor and with the organization about non-compliance. That the auditor basically states that this is a non-compliance. Then the internal team is not able to react on it, and often there is a tuffle that happens. So how do you see to this, and how do you address as basically from a security standpoint?
I think.
And how seriously is non-compliance should be taken by enterprise?
Yeah, definitely. I think, see, these standards are meant to protect you from some unforeseen circumstances for sure. But at the same time, what is important is how effectively that you are implementing these standards, right? Talking about the auditors coming and reviewing the controls and suggesting you some mitigations, definitely it's going to help you. But organization-wise, you have to prioritize your risks, and ideally you should be doing some kind of a risk assessment for your infrastructure, for your applications, for your network, whatever you feel is part of the scope of your engagement with the auditor, because there are so many standards. If I have to talk about the PCI standard, so PCI standards largely focus on your payment data. So if you are an organization where payment data is the critical element for you to protect, definitely the qualified security assessors who does the audit for the similar infrastructure would need to review all your controls in terms of the implementation of that. And at the same time, the scoping plays a very important role. If you're not able to scope your environment correctly, then it becomes a challenge, because PCI is all about minimizing the scope, not maximizing the scope, right? So talking about, what you just talked, there's a differences that comes between the auditors and the organization. It's because sometimes there is a little gap in the communication on understanding what was the scope. And once you have a clarity on the scope, it becomes really very easy for organization and auditor to work in tandem, work together to mitigate those risks that you will see. And yes, definitely these standards, as I rightly said starting, effective implementation of this standard is very critical to protect your infrastructure from getting compromised.
Very, very relevant points have been raised. Security standards, risk assessments, scoping. So this is where I come to Mr. Khusru, and I have a very interesting point to ask you. Now, when you work with enterprises, you advise these enterprises on doing security assessments. I want to know what is the approach that you have in terms of conveying these security related measures in a simplified way, and how does that overall conversation or communication happens in which the board is actually able to resonate the non-compliances.
Okay, so both the panelists have made a very, very interesting points about how to convey things to the board, but there are two definitions that let me take one step back. Right now I was in Mumbai attending the conference on the Global FinTech Fest, and our information technology minister was talking there. And he talked about three things as far as information technology is concerned. One is infrastructure, second is regulation, and third is social compliance. But the other two are not important, but the most important thing is regulation. And the government, as well as a lot of other bodies, are working very heavily on regulating the data or the information systems as a whole. Now, there are two words that every CISO should really write on his room, and that is due care and due diligence. When you have an exposure, when there is exposure of data or any vulnerability that gets exposed, the implementation or the investigating agency only looks for two things. Did you do due care? Were you aware that standards or security is needed? And did you do enough to protect the data? Correct. If you have done these two things, then you can be saved. But if not, then you will land yourself in an amazingly large problems. Now, for example, if I tell you, there is HIPAA. Like, every healthcare industry has to implement HIPAA. You know what is the penalty for exposure of HIPAA? If my information is right, $15,000 per instance per user of exposure is the penalty.
That's a big amount.
Huge. I have seen companies close down just because when there was an exposure, they had not done due care, they had not done due diligence, and then they were forced to pay penalty. Every security measure, everything that you do today is governed by some rule, some regulation or the other. So in a very specific manner, like of course PCI, when you implement PCI, there are a lot of other compliances that need to happen, and any exposure, like for simple things, can you store Aadhaar number without encryption? Can you store it in your local database? No, but a lot of people do it. Lot of CISA information systems officers don't know about it. So very, very important that in your domain, find out your information, what rules govern you, and what does an exposure cost you. Very important.
True. So very relevant point Mr. Khusru has raised. Friends, you guys would be doing VAPT, you would be identifying bugs, right? So, as rightly pointed by Khusru ji, regulations. So going forward, also see what vulnerability is identified and what particular section it is abusing as part of non-compliance of the particular framework or a regulatory. The enterprise would be having a particular framework, like let's say ISO 2071, or let's say PCI DSS for payment gateway. So that can be channelized. You can put those pointers, a very relevant point you have mentioned.
Can I add one
Sure.
one more point? There are a lot of bug bounties and public bug hacking things going on. Just be very careful of that, right? There is a system, there is a way to report bugs and find those out. If you break it, even though you are trying to say you are an ethical hacker,
True.
but you might end up being on the wrong side of the law.
But they can definitely report to certain.
Yeah,
As
so that
responsibilities.
is what I'm saying. Find out the process and report it.
Fair enough. So with that, I come to Mr. Dilip, and I have a very important question. Now you have got regulations, you have got assessments to do, you have got gaps, you have got priorities. The question comes is visibility. Now, what I see most of the time is these technical people, you would be working with a lot amount of security researchers and various people who are giving you excellent vulnerabilities. In fact, we learn from them at times. These secure young researchers, 17-year-old, 16-year-old, and they come up with crazy vulnerabilities. And what I see is the vulnerability is amazing. Let's say local file inclusion, familiar with local file inclusion or insecure deserialization. But what happens with that is when they come to you and they present it, firstly, it's not presentable. They just give the POC and just give a standardized description. But for the organization, what it needs means, do they need to have presentable report, and does it matter? Because end of the day, the non-technical, the stakeholders, the board wants to simplify things. So how do you put over that, and how you be a translator on those scenarios?
Okay, so I'll try to take a step back into the early days of my career when I started off. So I started with this company called Palladian Networks, which now has been integrated into Atos, as we all know. So started with associate security consultant, got learned into all the various fields of services of security they provide. I was one of the testers just like you guys were at that point of time. One of the common questions that came to me every time by all my customers, Dilip, you do all these fantastic testings, you come out with all the findings in the reports, and we are not able to challenge you on those items because they're all factual. But one, I'm not able to present this to my management because they don't understand what is the importance of this SQL injection or cross-site scripting or file inclusion vulnerabilities. Second, you give me 10,000 vulnerabilities. Tell me, where do I start? Because every vulnerability has a timeline given as per some standard or some policy. I have got 800 vulnerabilities which are critical and they all need to be closed in 10 days. How do I do that? I've got 80 applications to fix. I can't even imagine 80 restarts on 80 application-related servers in 10 days. It'll shut down my entire business. Give me a way, how do I buy some time from management to extend this schedule, but at the same time, I don't put the risk on my head that I will allow the application to remain vulnerable. But if any attack happens, I can't take the blame on myself. So those aspects were worrying at that point of time. The main item which troubled me, and I think will be a challenge with many of these people over here in the audience today, will be not able to translate into business risk.
True.
That's one area which I struggled, and that was when I took a decision to move out of consulting because I was a fresher in that space and move to the service side industry. Went across the BFSI sector, been in banking, NBFC, trading companies, mutual funds, fintech, now in IT's organization. Been almost 22 years in the industry. So now I've been there into across businesses. I understand what does the application do, what data it handles, what is the sensitivity of the data, why it matters so much to the company, and why would the company care if this application is exploited. That aspect is important. You can possibly throw out a number of bugs, but can you tell the business which bug is more important? Attend this one right now, because this is very critical. This can damage your reputation today. This one possibly can still buy time, another 5 more days, another 1 week is cool. That is the difference when you bring in as a, when you move from a technical tester to a security expert.
You have really touched down the hardcore concerns that most of the enterprises are facing, and I'm sure the people would be able to relate on this pointers. So which comes me to an interesting question to Mr. Bhatnagar, and it is, how do you simplify regulatory requirements to board members? Now, for a startup or with unicorns, they are in a race to to go climb. They have to reach valuations, public listing, all those things are there. And that time they have to address the regulations as well. So how do they address this regulation? Like we saw an example what Mr. Khusru gave. $15,000 per instance penalty, big number. So how do we do it?
I think, see, the industry is evolving very drastically. And I think we all acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of new fintech startups, that are coming into the space, whether it's a healthcare or a payments or whichever the vertical that we talk about. But at the same time, what is important is how they are prioritizing their compliances, how they are prioritizing the regulatory requirements. Understanding those regulatory requirements also plays a very critical role, because I think it's a thin line between what you read and what you implement, right? And now, in order to have that happen, you need to have the right partners, right associations, right SSS, coming across onto the table. If, for example, again, I'm just take a reference for the PCI standards, you should have the qualified security SSS tie up, work with them in order to make sure that you are implementing those requirements with the intent that what the regulators are looking for. Now, at the same time, the organizations also need to prioritize. See, you cannot achieve the security in one day. It has to be a phased manner that the companies have to take care of, right? Now, PCI, talk about PCI standards. PCI has a concept called self-assessment questionnaire, right? So if an organization is not ready day one to go for an on-site compliance where the QSA has to visit on-site, do the compliance audits, and do all controls check, and then finally do the annual validation, may not be practically possible. But at the same time, what is possible is that you doing assessments with the self-assessment questionnaire and making sure that you are improving day by day and getting to the next stage of improving your security posture. And that's where you need to communicate well to your board that this is the approach that you're taking. It's all about the approach that you're going to take. It cannot be just a last mile that you want to go and then implement something and then you have some glitches, or you have some glitches in the form of breaches or data compromises. So it's about building your grassroots well. So if you have a strong grassroots, the chances of you getting fallen is less.
So continuous resiliency is what you're talking about, resilience.
That's true.
So with this, I come, as we talk about continuous resiliency, I come to Mr. Khusru and I want to ask him the reality. I want to ask him what are the challenges that we as security advisors face? What are the challenges that security advisors face? Because most of the time, security advisors are looked as external people. So, yep.
That's an amazing fact of life, okay? And up till very, very recently, security was the first thing that would get neglected in your go-to-market strategy. If you want to cut time, you would want to add external features at the cost of cutting down on security. Now that there are regulations in place, people have started realizing that how important this is. Large exposures have happened, large vulnerabilities have been detected, large, like if I remember right, I was in US when Windows Server, the first version of Windows Server was getting released. And they released that server with 65,000 known vulnerabilities on that day at that point of time. So that was the audacity at that point of time when people were not paying any attention to security. Like, theek hai, hoga. Like I audited, I will not name the institution, but I helped audit one very large academic institution, very, very well-known academic institution in Ahmedabad, and they were hacked. They were hacked by internal students. We found out, to our surprise, so many vulnerabilities, but when we decided to put that report in front of the management, they said, oh, that takes a lot of money, oh, that takes a lot of effort. We'll come back to you sometimes later. So, and that is a way of life. But today, things are changing because the regulations, if you look at the IT Act of India or the new Data Protection Act that is coming in, all those things coming in are forcing people to think of security as the first line of defense. Another thing is that legacy systems do not have security. We are sitting on tons of legacy systems, tons of them, where security goes in as an afterthought. So when security goes in as an afterthought, there are a lot of areas, lot of still lacuna areas which are open for exposures, for vulnerabilities, all of this put together.
Interesting. So you have mentioned a very important point, and that is hack, correct? Most of the people or security board is concerned that they don't want to be hacked, and that's the very fine reason why they are investing on cybersecurity. Now, this also showcases 2-3 things. Number one is that their seriousness, correct? Now, with that, I have a very important question to you, Mr. Dilip, and I want to ask you, sometimes this happens, and you must have seen this, that a low vulnerability is marked as critical, and it is exaggerated. And it is pushed in such a way that it has a bigger impact. And it sometimes reaches to the levels of CEOs from the who's or who's. Do you think because of all this, the security interest among board is being reduced?
Definitely, Smith. So that's what I called out in the earlier point also, that you need to understand how to qualify a risk item. You cannot just say every SQL injection or every cross-site scripting or every attack is going to be of equal value. For example, we have servers deployed or applications deployed in the organization. Some could be sitting way far away inside your organization fortress and protected by layers of security, accessible only to, say, possibly 2 or 3 users in the organization. Whereas some of them would be only accessible to a certain segment of the organization or a certain VLAN or certain trusted computers. And a third set of applications could be accessible to the entire world, which could be your customers. Now, you can't have the same vulnerability across these 3 different type of applications with the same severity provided. You have to understand and profile every application or every system. How many people access it? What data does it hold? What is the sensitivity of the data? What will happen if this data is compromised or the system is attacked? Will the information go out? Will it get breached? Will it be reported in news? Does it have any reputation impact? Does it have regulatory impacts? Does it have financial impacts? Unless you do those assessments and profiling for every application, the vulnerability will just be a vulnerability. It becomes a risk-based vulnerability management only after you provide the risk context of the organization, the data, and the context of the impact to the organization.
Interesting. So one question I would be having to Mr. Nitin, and that is what would be, so there are all security researchers we see sitting over here, the young generation. From the standpoint of security, as part of their career, what would be your advice to them in terms of growing their skills and focusing and simplifications of their non-technical stakeholder related aspects? How they can communicate and simplify?
I think as a security researcher, I think most importantly, I think, we have been discussing this in the morning. I think in the room, I think we'll have 2 set of people here sitting, right? One, who are focused on finding the vulnerabilities and trying to, keep the organizations updated about the vulnerabilities that they have, right? And there will be one set of people in the room who will be having a mindset of like how we can improve on the security posture of an organization, right? And with that, I think I'll want to answer that in a way that, you need to find your interest level and improve on your skills, meet the like-minded people from the industry, from the compliance side and also from the non-compliance side, from the technical side and from both aspects. You have to get the insights and then accordingly choose the aspects that you want to consider in your profile. Now, having said that, again, one point I just wanted to, which you said, how you want to communicate as a security researcher. I think communication is a key, and presenting your thought process to the senior level, senior management, board members is also going to play a very, very critical role. Now, some people misunderstood when I say presentable. Presentable doesn't mean that you have to be suited, booted, and go and present to someone, but it has to be in a very palatable way that, what you want to communicate. It should not look like that you are trying to make use of that opportunity to make some kind of a financial gain. Instead, you should make it feel like, this is something being exposure which could lead to a major disruption for your organization and could have a financial impact. So this is the way that you should look at it, instead showing on the other side. And that's where many security researchers would also face that kind of heat from the industry. But having the right set of communication, it's very, very critical.
Interesting. So you mentioned about compliance. So that's where I come to Khusruji. So one important point I would like to ask you is about GRC. So how is GRC being taken by board, and are they basically focused on in terms of pursuing their governance, risk and compliance? How are they measuring their GRC?
An honest answer, very few people even understand the full gamut of GRC. Okay? So it is still very evolving, very, because still we are still working to understand and capture very basic vulnerabilities. Okay? Very high level structural vulnerabilities are still very, very far off. So people are going there because unfortunately or fortunately, they are forced to do that. There are regulations, there are IT acts, the government is cracking the whip. A lot of these things are happening, so people are going there. So, but if you ask me, still we have a far way to go, because like I was reading right now, Optus, one of the largest telenetworking setup in Australia, had a huge exposure where 9.8 million accounts were stolen. Now 9.8 million accounts means 25% population of Australia. Still we are sitting on that kind of exposure with a lot of these kind of security in place. We are still working and getting these kind of exposure. So honestly, we are still very far off from having proper GRC mechanisms in place at a lot of large and small enterprises. Small enterprises still manage and do a good deal because they are evolving. They have recently started, so they can pivot very quickly. But for the large corporates, still it is very difficult, still a long way to go.
So one last question I would like to highlight, and then we would be open for questions that we can take up. So one important question I want to ask each panelist over here. So I start with Mr. Dilip. I want to ask you, often we hear in news or when we are speaking with corporates, we are discussing with our clients, there is a skill shortage in the industry. But you see the town hall is full. We have got a couple of people, security researchers. How do you see to it that the talent shortage that is there in the country in terms of cybersecurity? Is it really, or do we need to just change certain things on the ground or onto the process form which can simplify?
So honestly, let's do a litmus test right here. How many of you guys are engineers over here? And how many are non-engineers? So this is where the understanding is. Typically the myth in the companies is, if you see most of the JDs coming out, it is BTech, BE is a requirement for all your JDs. The moment you put that in your JD, the HR person blindly puts that as a filter into LinkedIn and all other Naukri and other sites. Half your population from this entire room is disappeared. They're not considered also for the interviews in the first place. That is the problem with the companies that we are having over here today. And when they have turned a blind eye to this vast talent out here, then they say that there's skill shortage.
So same, what would be Nitin, your thoughts?
I agree more with Dilip. I think this is the, I think I would like to thank Besides, I think it's a great platform for the security researchers to come and, and get a chance to meet with the industry, leaders. And I think I'm really glad to see, we have such a pool of talent in the country. And I've been asked in various TV interviews, we have a shortage. We have seen DSCI reports that you have a shortage of 100 million cybersecurity professionals. I think there is no lack at this point. I think it's just about, you coming out and we taking you back to the industry and say to the world that, India is ahead of the other countries in terms of the talent pool. I think a massive one, I think thanks to Beside to gather all of these security researchers and professionals here at one place, and I would love to be part of it in some way next
That's
year.
a benchmark statement. So, what would be, what's your views, Mr. Khusru, on it?
Uh, there is a tremendous shortage of qualified resources. Demand and supply. The demand that is there for qualified resources for security, we are not able to keep pace with. And if you go to the fundamentals, your academics and your education courses are to blame for it. Because I teach at a lot of academic institutions as a visiting faculty, as a lot of it, but I am yet to find a good structured course that teaches computer security. Yes, there are a lot of just basic fundamental certificates, all those things. These poor guys have all gone out and learned security. But if you ask me, is there a course which has majors in computer security? I am sorry, I might not be able to even name 5 educational institutes that really certify you as B.Tech security, cyber security. My take on it.
I just wanted to add here to sir. I think definitely, I think there is a requirement for the educational institutions to come up with these courses. I did my master's in information security from IIIT Allahabad, and I think one of the finest institute of the country. And they also do have an MTech in information security. If they are interested, probably can go. And I think there are some universities in Bhopal, I think they also offer, and in Mumbai also there are some universities which offer. But yes, definitely, these kind of courses needs a rapid ramp up in terms of spread across to various universities and various institutions. But at the same time, if you want to really grow your career in the payment security space, I think the PCI standards, if you talk about, there are several certifications that are professional in nature, which will give you that exposure on how you should be protecting the payment data, just for the larger set of organizations, including financial institutions and globally. So you should look for the PCI trainings and certification programs if you are really interested in payment security.
Interesting. So, considering the time's shortage, we'll be taking 2 questions. Yes, we can start with the gentleman over here. Yep. Can someone get a mic?
We can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'll give it an attempt. So, you are working with which company, sir? I have my own company. Okay, awesome. So, let me take my example. First, I started off with whatever learnings that I had done as part of my induction in my earlier days of careers. Then, as in when you are doing your testings and your various projects and assignments, you will learn more through those activities because only practice will teach you more stuff. When you make errors and when you come in front of people, then you learn more. Next, you have to constantly stay updated with what's happening in the market. You need to know what are latest technologies, what are latest attack vectors, what are latest hacks that are happening. And you need to find ways from the media or from other sources to see what were the various methods used to perform that attack. Like the recent Uber attack or the Otis attack, how have they happened? What really translated into it? The Swift hack that happened some time back, what really happened in that? Many people do not really read the entire concept of what happened in the attack. They just understand that an attack happened, it impacted so much into the organizations across, and so many companies were impacted, period. They don't look after that. You need to come beyond that. Get a little deep down to understand exactly the modus operandi around it. If you remember, somewhere around in 2008, 9, I'm talking about, there was prepaid card hack that happened in India. And there were prepaid cards to the tune of, say, 500 odd cards roughly, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And they were translated into almost 41 million worth of transactions, despite having zero balance on them. So cards were cloned, and then they were used across the US. So how did it happen? What really resulted in it? What was the failure point? Those aspects are very important to learn. From our perspective, at least today, if I have to learn new things, I look at a couple of sources of information on news reading sites, articles, physical material, as well as do attend some trainings and conferences like these, for example. There are CISO conferences. We have a CISO WhatsApp group that keeps us updated on what's happening latest. Nitin and I are part of many of them today. And we do connect offline also on personal interest, just on a cup of coffee or for dinner. We discuss our problems or whatever achievements we've done. We experiment with each other's ideas. These are various methods that keep on helping us grow. Because something that worked for him might work better for me or might not work for me. And that's what helps us understand what is good, bad, ugly in those spaces. Lastly, don't stop learning. Learning does not mean only looking at the certifications or formal training programs. It has to be in any and every form. Any place is a knowledge point. I hope I answered your question somewhere.
Yeah, can I add? Sure. There is one big source that you cannot neglect, and that is the government regulation, right? CERT, C-E-R-T, has to be your best friend. And then the domain in which you work and the geography in which you work has to be the two variables that will impact what you read and what you should know about. As your first line of defense. After that, sky is the limit. As you said, in an IT development world, how do you keep track of what happens in Java development? Similarly, you keep track of what happens in security.
We can take one final question. Yeah, Mr. Gentleman. Yeah. We can take one. Yep. Can you be louder?
You're saying as a fresher in the industry? There are multiple ways, my friend. So you could possibly approach into a consulting firm, for example, or a services organization where you start off with a tester and then keep on growing out. But if you're looking at an industry, for example, like a banking industry or some organization under the CISO office, the point is there could be multiple requirements. It could be a straight ahead tester like you guys, for example, today that you are performing, where you're supposed to pointedly go and just blindly attack. Find out something and give me back, and then help my other team translate it for me. That could be one method. The second method could be that are you able to understand the business aspect of it? Now, when you're talking about in fresher perspective, what I would look at is, are you able to understand and grasp the basic concepts of security? Do you know the basic jargons that are there today in the market? And what do they mean? Don't look at those aspects. What you're doing in your engineering, for example, that is also good enough. Are you able to know what is an antivirus versus a next generation antivirus versus an EDR? Do you know the difference between the three of them? What does it do? And for example, if I say today from an organization compliance perspective, if the standard check for malware protection was you check whether antivirus agent is showing on your machine, does it have the latest definition date, and does it show as a weekly scan is configured or no? These three checks were done in normal antivirus days. All right? Now, let's short circuit come 20 years later. You're an EDR zone today. You don't have an antivirus anymore. Do you have any agent sitting on your machine? No. Do you have any definitions? No. Do you have a weekly scan? No. How do you prove that your malware control is there? You need to understand that difference. How do you bring that part? That is what you'll be asked to understand when you come into the corporate zone. All right, so those aspects will come in as part of learning. So you need to understand what is the fundamental difference between how antivirus works with how EDR works to give you still the same or better protection. If you understand fundamentals, you can answer those questions.
I will just add, there is a YouTube channel known as Eric Cole. Do see to it. It would help you a lot. Eric Cole. Yeah. Security anchor, if I'm not wrong. So yes, with this, we come to the end of our panel, and I would quickly like to summarize the way we were able to put forward pointers, views, and thought process. It was really amazing. The power pack panelists, distinguished professionals, you people were able to give clarity to the end audiences, to the security researchers, what really it is to communicate with non-stakeholders. What are the key areas? Like we discussed about cyber attacks, we discussed about ransomware regulations, we discussed about standards, then we discussed about what the people can do, the students or the young generations can do as part of their career. Indeed, it was great to have you all. Thank you so much for giving an amazing insight. This will certainly help all these people sitting over here to transform their thought process and career. I would like to thank each and every panelist for giving their amazing views. And with that, I will also like to thank Besides Ahmedabad for giving an excellent hospitality to each and every speaker. For me, thank you Dipen, thank you Nitin, Nikhil for giving an excellent conference to the security research and for speakers as well for us. Like, thank you so much. Good day,
Thank
Jai
you.
Hind.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith and all the panelists. Such an insightful session on which is how to communicate security in layman words to boards and non-technical stakeholders. Thank you so much.